Alrighty, welcome to the Excitable Soul Podcast, everybody. Here we're interested in all things purpose. We want to know where and how people find meaning and connection in their lives. In every episode, we will be hearing the real life stories of how people have uncovered, understood, and unleashed their own unique sense of purpose. Our hope is that we can all learn from the journeys of our guests so that we can all better find a sense of purpose in our own lives. I'm host James Glover, performance coach and purpose nerd. I'm incredibly excited to be exploring these stories with you. So let's get going, shall we? Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Excitable Soul Podcast. We've got Sarah Gillard with us. Sarah is the CEO of Blueprint for Better Business, a charity inspiring businesses to embrace a purpose that benefits society and respects people and the planet. A passionate advocate for making business more human, Sarah champions workplaces where people flourish, communities thrive, and sustainability drives decision-making. With over 25 years leadership experience in major UK retail companies, including the John Lewis Partnership, Sarah redefined and embedded organisational purpose to fuel innovation and differentiation. She holds a degree in politics, philosophy and economics from Oxford, is a fellow of the RSA, a trustee of the BGF Foundation, as well as a member of the British Standards Institute Advisory Panel for Purpose-Driven Organisations. Sarah brings a huge amount of expertise in purposeful leadership and cultural transformation. This conversation is a wonderful blend of personal journey and organisational possibility. Enjoy. Okay, Sarah, welcome to the Excitable Soul Podcast.
Thank you very much.
Amazing to have you with us. How are you feeling today?
Bit cold, actually. It's -6 outside my window at the moment, but it is blue sky and there is still a frost on every single leaf and twig, so it's gorgeous.
Yeah, it is really, really beautiful, isn't it? And I was there this morning scrabbling around for gloves for my children to kind of get them into school, because we're at now the end of the week, which means we've been through 4 or 5 pairs of gloves
Obviously.
this week, because we never come back with a pair.
No, obviously.
So yeah, it's beautiful and creates a wonderful morning team challenge.
Great parenting.
Yeah.
Well done. It's a win. Take it.
My wife will be proud. Thank you so much for being with us today. I think it's a kind of a real treat for those listeners out there, in that you are somebody that basically holds a kind of a really deep personal connection to purpose and kind of lives it in the role that you play in the world professionally too. And so I'm going to massively geek out in this conversation, I think.
Good. You and me both. Yeah, and I feel very, very, very lucky to have scrabbled my way to be able to do what I'm interested in as a job. So
yeah, and I'm super keen to kind of explore that journey to where you are today, but also, you know, kind of how it's going to shape you going forwards in terms of the kind of the leaps of faith and the kind of the ambitions that excite you in the work that you're doing. But if we can start, if we can kind of go back and kind of start the meaning journey of where I guess a sense of purpose almost started to show up for you, where you became consciously aware of it. What were some of the kind of the moments that have really shaped who you are in the world?
Gosh, well, I'll just wang on, James, and then you can tell me to speed up.
Yeah, brilliant. Wanging on is massively appreciated on this podcast.
Okay, good. Well, if I go back to what I studied at university, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I was really jealous of people who had a sense of purpose. You know, they wanted to be a doctor or a vet or a lawyer or something, and I didn't know. So I chose a degree that had the sort of broadest spread of things that I could amble about in, which was politics, philosophy and economics. And I didn't think that any of that was going to be vocational, because I didn't want to be a politician or an economist, or I'm not sure there are that many paid philosopher jobs. But I just thought it would be interesting. And so that's where I began to sort of think about big concepts.
Yeah.
But like I said, I did not think it was going to end up in a job. And I went traveling naturally after university, and sat on beaches and sat on mountains.
Don't want the real world just yet. Thank you very much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In fact, I came back from the traveling after 6 months and decided that I was not only was I never going to work in an office, I'd probably never wear shoes again. That didn't last very long. So all of my friends were living in London and becoming, consultants and accountants and things, and I wanted to hang out with them. So I needed a job. So I got a temp job. because I knew I didn't really want a proper job yet.
Yeah.
I didn't want to commit myself to something that I wasn't super passionate about, but I didn't know what I was interested in. So I got a temp job, and it happened to be in retail. And after about, so it was a luxury jewelers, and it was fine, but paid the rent. And after about a year, I thought, well, if I want to stay in this kind of area, I probably ought to get trained in a bigger organization. So I moved to the Arcadia Group.
Yeah.
So this is the big retail group that owned Topshop and Dorothy Perkins and Topman and Burton. And at the time, it was seen as the place to go for the training because it invested a lot in people, invested in systems, and it, was a sort of queen of the high street. And so I was like 22, and it was fun. I was shopping for a living, basically, and coming back and doing some stuff on a computer. Well, one of the computers, because there weren't that many then. And all my friends were working 18-hour days, slogging their guts out, doing accountancy exams and grunt work consultancy and stuff. And I was thinking, oh, I'm totally winning. Tiny amusing thing. I worked at Dorothy Perkins in the head office, and I worked on the department that sold leggings and tracksuit trousers. And in order to differentiate it from the jeans side, they were called woven bottoms. And unfortunately, my department was called soft bottoms. So my friends would take great delight in phoning me up at work because I had to say hello soft bottoms when I answered the phone. My introduction.
So let me just pause you there, because that is absolutely amazing, right? So right now in this story we've gone, it was loads of fun. I was winning at life. And then we get into the detail of what winning looks like. When I answered the phone, hello, soft bottoms. Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. It caused a lot of hilarity amongst my friends. But what was not to like? I was like 20, 22, 23, living with my friends in London, shopping and, thinking about leggings. It wasn't... it was fun and not particularly difficult or stressful. And then about a year and a half, 2 years into working there, Philip Green bought the company. And for those younger listeners, perhaps who don't know him, he is a famous, now infamous businessman who was the sort of epitome of shareholder primacy in all of its raw form. So he bought the Arcadia Group, took it private, and was very clear internally and externally that the reason he bought it was to maximize his own personal wealth and that of his family. And that he would do that by basically squeezing every last bit of value out of the organization and take as much in dividend each year as he possibly could. So the goal was short-term profit maximization. And that was like super clear. Now, on the one hand, it made decisions very easy. It made it, efficient as an organization because you knew what success looked like and you knew how you would be measured. And decisions didn't take very long because you just worked out what made the most money in the short term and did that. But I began to observe how it was changing the nature of the organization. So investment was cut in systems and people. So the training kind of went by the wayside, and anything that didn't get an immediate return was sort of cut. And I also was seeing that the culture internally was moving from one of a sort of collegiate, fun, enjoyable place to one that was mostly run by fear. And people were beginning to kind of cry in the toilets at lunchtime or get very stressed on a Sunday night before they came into work. And or throw up, through anxiety. And I was thinking, God, we're selling leggings and t-shirts. Is this normal? Is this just what business is? Because here am I, broadly a philosophy graduate who dabbled my feet in business early on and thought it was mostly about selling leggings and going to the pub. And maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was about profit maximization and squeezing every last bit of value out. But I also saw that I didn't think it was going to have a long-term good effect on the company. Things like our supply relationships, which have been built up over decades and were based on trust and mutual respect. The suppliers were getting squeezed in ways that were, to be honest, I thought quite unethical, in order to extract value, and then sort of threatened, if they didn't comply. And so trust externally was being eroded. And so there I was, 23 or 24 or whatever, philosophy graduate, going, is this just how you run a business? And I'd just been naive. You had to kind of see people as resources or assets, or in most cases liabilities, that you needed to instrumentalize in service of maximizing a financial goal. And I thought, well, maybe this is just how it is. And there was a here's my epiphany moment. I remember, in fact, I'd graduated from soft bottoms and I was working on blouses. So I was working on blouses. We sold a lot. Well, indeed, we sold a lot of polycotton blouses and Dorothy Perkins. And I had worked with my team to prepare a presentation. I'd not met Philip Green. I was too lowly, but I had a meeting with him in the diary, and we'd worked really hard on this presentation. We'd stayed late a lot and, worked a lot. And we were very proud that we were predicting something, I can't remember, 100K increase in profit or something that year. I can't remember what it was, but I think we had a meeting with him that was scheduled for something like 3:00 on a Thursday afternoon. And at 7:30 on Thursday evening, we were called in. No apology or anything else. We'd just been sort of pacing the floor waiting. And so I did my spiel. I was, super pumped. I did my spiel about how we were going to make 100K more money this year. And in my memory, who knows whether this is actually true, but in my memory, his feet were on the desk, because they often were, and he was smoking, because he often was, even though it was already illegal in offices. And then he sort of sniffed and said, well, that will power my yacht for about 2 hours. Oh. And I remember leaving that evening with my shoulders a bit slumped, going to be honest with you, James, thinking, it's a good use of my life. Am I really going to work this hard? I mean, even though it was fun, and, well, it was less fun than it used to be, and it was now pretty stressful, and people were crying and blah, blah, blah. And really all it was going to do was power this very rich man's yacht for a few hours. It did make me think, I'm not sure that this is actually how I want to spend my career. It's all very well just working to pay the rent and things, but and I totally respect that that's many people's only choice. Got to pay the rent. That's what a job is. But I knew that I had choices, and I was being a bit lazy, I guess, in not thinking harder about how I was spending 9 to 5 and what it was in service of. But I knew that the ultimate goal was probably not powering Philip Green's yacht for a few more hours. So it made me
of all the things you could be in service of, that didn't feel like a worthwhile. I was really interested. So. Yeah, big time. I can imagine, especially after you'd worked so hard and prepared so much, and the kind of that was the reaction to that hard work and effort. I think there's something in listening to you tell this story where, in the first part of this story, it feels like the experience of others was kind of prompting observation. So you talked about people throwing up at work and kind of an increased level of anxiety and kind of fear shift, but I didn't hear that have an impact on you, or how. And so I'm interested, like, were you feeling a shift and change inside you when you were watching that, or was it kind of a curiosity of naivety, as you say, like kind of almost to some degree don't know any different, but this doesn't feel right at some level? I'm wondering, was there something that was happening internally for you at that point before Philip Green's just total disregard of hard work and effort?
Well, I definitely, I mean, for a start, I was curious. I wasn't stressed. I didn't really care that much, to be honest. I was clocking in and clocking out at 9 to 5, pay the bills. So I didn't throw up in the toilets or cry before work or anything, because I genuinely was not engaged, which is another interesting point about why, eventually I think purpose really does matter a lot. I was an unengaged but very diligent employee. I did the job all right. But I was looking around, and I didn't have any kids or my husband or anything. So I didn't have, if I was a bit upset about work, it didn't impact on other people when I went home. But I could see people in more senior positions to me who were super stressed and who were late in the office at night, who did have kids and who did have partners and who did have, it impacted on other people's lives apart from theirs. I do remember thinking, well, that feels like it's a net negative, right, for
Yeah.
society, even if some people get richer as a result of all of this hard work. I'm not sure if you, and having done philosophy, I'd studied utilitarianism, right? The net happiness of the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. And I was thinking, this is net negative. There are more
Yeah.
people impacted by this than just employed here. That if you look at the supply chain, if you look at the communities in which we operate, if you look at the families of the employees, the level of trust in society, there's a whole load of ripple effects here that will not be observed in any balance sheet or profit and loss account, that doesn't feel like it's contributing positive impact to the world. In fact, it's net negative. So I was sort of curious about that again. The politics, philosophy, economics degree began to kick in a way that I had not anticipated it
I'm
becoming
questioning
vocational.
some stuff here. Yeah.
Well, questioning it totally from a philosophical, what's the point of all this? But
Yeah.
also from a sort of political and economic, is this how you have to behave to be competitive in what was the mid 90s? So it was sort of a, high growth, highly competitive, quite disrupted economy. I was in retail for 25 years, and well, still now, but the first 10 of that was really about how the hell do we think about the internet? So retailers were really under pressure. Their business model was under pressure. So the commercial threat was real, and big commercial organizations were going under. Woolworths, again, I don't know what average age your listeners is, James, but I remember Woolworths.
Really wide, actually. So many would be going, yeah, remember Woolworths?
Yeah.
I remember Pick and Mix.
Big giants of the high street were getting totally killed by the internet. And so I was looking at it from a kind of economic perspective, going, well, look, this is a massively disrupted industry. Perhaps you have to be super focused on short-term competitiveness that relies on maximizing financial returns. And the alternative is death, as a retailer. So, stop being naive. This is the reality. So yeah, it was sort of curiosity and a bit of an awakening around not only what's the human impact of this, but is this just how business is?
And really wonderful to hear like those kind of parallel experiences emerging from within you, like that almost big personal question of what's the point of all of this, and is it worth it? To be a part of it, is the cost worth it? At the same time, going, there's a bigger economic consideration of, is this how it has to be? Like, those are pretty big questions to be kind of wrestling with internally at 24, 25, when up until that point it'd been like, do I wear shoes? Like, I want to be Moana, like living on an island somewhere and fishing feels great. And now all of a sudden you're in a place of like, ooh, these things are sparking you to life. What happened with you wrestling with those questions? Where did that then lead you?
So I stayed for a bit, probably longer than I should. I stayed for another probably 3 or 4 years, because I was getting promoted. Like I said, I wasn't throwing up at work, so it wasn't like a huge personal cost to me, and I was learning a lot about how big business operates and how it copes with external disruption and competition. But I definitely wasn't loving it. And so I also was not quite ready to go and be a consultant, because I was still, frankly, wanting to do 9 to 5. Strong, lazy theme going through it.
But it also says something, doesn't it? That actually there might have been some motivation in wanting to do a role like that, and actually what that might have brought from a kind of an intellectual experience. But actually, the kind of the how you go to work around that was still no, thank you. Like, that's just not worth it.
Yeah, and I remember, I do remember thinking, well, this is a trade-off, because again, I could see all my friends doing it, and they were getting paid a lot more money and doing really interesting projects, but they were having to work so hard. I genuinely, at that time, just didn't feel interested enough in the world of work to commit that much of my waking hours to it. However, I thought, well, okay, if I'm going to do 9 to 5, at least I'll try and do it in an organisation that I feel less, I don't know, disconnected from.
Yeah.
So I wandered around, and I then took a job at Monsoon Accessorize because it was a founding member of the Ethical Trade Initiative, and I thought, well, this is going to be different and better. And in many ways it was, but in many ways I could see it going down the same route. So by the time I joined, broadly it had been set up and run by brilliant women in like flip-flops and caftans, working 3 days a week, who absolutely loved what they did and loved all of the, craftsmanship that they were using in these small Indian, often family-run businesses, and the design aesthetic. And, it was a very love-based organization, if I can call it that. And again, in retail, it's one of the things that I sort of realized. It's both an art and a science. And if you only apply it as a science, it's not going to work, because so much of retail is about emotion and feeling. And you can't really create a brand that's going to last unless it's infused with love in some way. And these brands were, but when I joined, I think they sort of suddenly realized that they had like 1,000 accessorized stores or something, and it was growing, and they wanted Monsoon to grow. And so they had begun to professionalize it, and all of the brilliant women in caftans and flip-flops were leaving, and people like me, suited and from big corporates, were coming in, and the soul was dying of this thing. And again, I was like, oh God, it's happening again. All of the supply chain.
It was you the whole time.
The supply chains are moving from these, artisan workshops in India to big factories in China, and the price points were coming down because they bought a load of shops, ironically, from Philip Green, that they had to fill with cheap clothes. And so instead of handcrafted stuff, it was kind of printed and mass produced, and customers were beginning to realize. And I was just, again, my heart got a little sadder again as I was thinking, well, another great British high street brand is sort of being killed from the inside out because of the pursuit of financial goals, because it was also under commercial pressure. So after I had a couple of kids there, so I wasn't actually there a huge amount. I was mostly on maternity leave. But when I came back, I thought, is now the time in my mid-30s to actually think harder about how I'm spending my working life? And do I, at this point, go join an NGO or a think tank or a values-based consultancy or something? Because I'm not sure that retail is for me, because maybe you just can't survive in it, in this highly competitive industry, and have any sense of trying to do something positive, in terms of people and planet. So that was my sort of crossroads. And then a friend of mine had just moved to the John Lewis Partnership, and she phoned me up and she said, well, it's really weird here, but I think you'll like it. Which I took as a compliment.
Yeah, definitely.
Sure.
Nothing but compliment in that.
And it was interesting because at the time, headhunters had sort of suggested various options. And whenever the John Lewis Partnership had come up, they sort of said, well, you could go there, but it's really slow. And because of the whole democratic thing, you can't get anything done. It's really bureaucratic, and it's very, it's not cutting edge, and it's not fun. It's not exciting. And, I'm not sure it's going to be around, and you probably don't want to go there. But I did a bit of research, and it sort of piqued my interest because, it's the UK's largest co-owned business. So it doesn't have external shareholders. And I thought, well, that would be an interesting change, having come from...
Nobody has a yacht here.
Nobody has a yacht, exactly. And you're not trying to make any, like, one person or group of people rich. The whole point of it is an organisation that is owned by the people who work in it. So from a sort of politics, philosophy and economics degree, it was a bit geeky. I was a bit like, this is Labour deploying capital rather than capital deploying Labour. This is an interesting experiment. So I joined, and I saw immediately that it was different. And remember, I can't remember what the decision was, but my first week there, a decision needed to be made that in all of the other businesses I'd worked in, it wouldn't have even been a conversation. There was a kind of, here are two ways we could go. One is the right thing long term and for all of our stakeholders, but makes less money in the short term. The other one, we make more money in the short term, but it's not great for the other. It's legal, but it's not great for the other stakeholders. And there was a discussion, and they went with the long term mutual value creation option. And I was just like, what?
Sorry, can we just pause there for a second, rewind and go, what?
And literally I was going, well, what does success look like here? How do you know what good looks like? Well,
amazing.
What are the criteria by which, we judge whether this organization is successful or not? And so began what turned into a 12-year proper geek out, James, on a different way of thinking about business. That completely lit my fire. And I went, my poor husband and kids, I went from being a clock in, clock out 9 to 5 person to a swivel-eyed obsessive.
Amazing.
This organization. I worked like an absolute dog. Every book I read, I didn't read a novel for 10 years. I was reading strategy books and management theory books and books that the founder had written, and I properly geeked out.
And what's really wonderful here is, you like at one level, you share the story of your experiences in those kind of those first moments of your career, and kind of diligent and committed, but in no way engaged. And so 9 to 5 was where it was at. Then and yet those environments were about go, push, maximize, and you were entirely resistant. Right, entirely resistant. Yeah. I'm not doing that. I'm here for other reasons. In fact, I'm going to be out of here for a couple of years because I'm going to go have me some children. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in an environment which isn't push, it isn't maximize at all, and you flip. Like I'm in, up to the forehead, and I'm like deeply committed. So there was something about that just flipped how you wanted to engage. So and this feels like it's going to be rich territory, but before we dive into that, there's a couple of things that I just want to almost kind of play back, which is you described this experience at Dorothy Perkins of I was learning a lot, and I was progressing, I was being successful, I was being promoted, I was learning it, but I wasn't loving it. And then actually the next step into Monsoon was there was a whole bunch of people there that really loved what they did, and they kind of loved what they created, and they loved and this language of love all of a sudden started to emerge in what you were sharing. And then again, you kind of went another layer for me, which was the soul of the business was dying. So there's something in this kind of experience for you where the emotional connection to what you were doing and why you were doing it was kind of growing internally for you. And so I'm wondering if you could just speak to that, your kind of experience of that, if you like, because there's this like the cerebral of I'm engaging at this level and I'm kind of clear why, but there was also something else playing out for you the whole time.
God, good observation, James. You're good at this, right?
I'm trying. I'm learning too. But
it's a really interesting observation because so whenever you do those MBTI profile things, I am off the scale T. So there's the pairs, for those who do, there are various sort of pairs, and one spectrum is thinking and feeling. And it's not to say that you only do one or the other. It's just what your natural preference is. And I'm off the scale think. I live in my head basically, and that suited my job up until my mid-30s. I didn't really want my heart to be engaged with work because I was selling leggings. I didn't
soft bottoms.
Exactly. It was fun, but I wasn't passionate about it. Now some people were, and that was great for them. They really, really loved developing the products and imagining what the customer's going to want, and they tended to be buyers. I was merchandising, so the buyer was the one going to New York saying, "Darling, I love it, it's fabulous," and I'm the merchandiser sitting back in the office on the screen going, "You can buy 4,800 of those because I predict there's going to be a 73% sell through," and I was the maths geek on the other end who never traveled anywhere and just worked it out. And intellectually, that was kind of stimulating, but it wasn't a passion. But I guess the my curiosity came from. What's the impact on people? And like I said, at Monsoon, etc., people loved it. There was a real sense of pride about the organization and what they were doing, and the lives that they were touching, and the products that they were creating, and it was really infectious. And I think, again, brands at their best, that's what they're selling is that love that's kind of manifest in products, and you either feel it or you don't. And I suppose what I observed in the first bit of my career is customers can feel it too. You know? They might not be in the head office seeing people cry in the toilets, but as soon as the love disappears from a brand, it becomes very transactional. And you kind of sense it because we're humans, right? You know, we like to think that we're just cognitive, rational beings, but actually most of our decisions are based on stuff that we then post-rationalize because
exactly.
It's been instinct in some way. So it became increasingly interesting to me how that heart stuff, soul stuff, gut stuff, human stuff was a really important part of what work is and what the outputs are. And it wasn't just all spreadsheets and numbers and clever strategies.
Yeah, and I'm really interested in this kind of emotion-led, post-rationalized kind of experience, and predominantly because it feels like your entry into the John Lewis world was a connection between that cognitive clarity, if you like, and emotional conviction. And again, just hearing you talk about, I didn't really know what I was going to do at university. You know, kind of philosophy, politics, and economics sounds like a really great idea. But then using the kind of the frames that you understood to make sense of the world around you in terms of there seems to be a net negative here. What does a net positive look like? And then all of a sudden, you were going into environments like Monsoon and going, oh wow, there's something that feels important here, and being able to then post-rationalize that within this. Oh, there's a net positive in this environment because there's a soul and there's some love and there's some kind of community and there's, you know, ecosystem, etc. And then all of a sudden you're in a situation where, wow, all of that exists in the same place, and not with the same cost and compromise as I've seen before. So like wallop. Let's like you've been sandwiched now between this thing that you weren't paying attention to and this thing that didn't seem important but actually was critical.
Yeah, totally. And I really loved the exploration of it because it had not been my experience, and I had never expected to really be engaged at work. You know, I was very prepared to just do the hours and take the money, and then suddenly here I was, utterly sucked in and obsessed by an organization that I genuinely, you know, people would say, what do you do? And on the one hand, I could say, oh, I work in this department at John Lewis Partnership, but mostly what I said was something like, I'm reinventing capitalism. Or I'm trying to work out how to make sure this organization still survives 100 years from now. I mean, these are not normal things.
Yeah, amazing.
You know, yeah, it was a real shift in my sense of what I was actually doing at work. So regardless of what my job was, I felt a very different connection to what I was doing and why it mattered to me.
Yeah. How did that show up? So for the people that are kind of listening and kind of following almost what feels like a kind of linear career progression, there is something really emotive in those experiences. What was it that, you know, that word obsession, I became obsessed, like for somebody that's going to show up and take the money, see you later, is now obsessed with what flipped the switch?
I mean, so many things. So for instance, often when I walked into the reception at the head office, instead of seeing people crying in the toilets or, you know, throwing up on the pavement, there'd be a ukulele orchestra of so they're called partners. The employees who work there are partners because everyone owns the business, and partners would come together and play the ukulele for the delight of other partners as they came into the building. And it's the most extraordinary place. It has choirs, it has orchestras, it has all sorts of communities. And just to give a little bit of the background for people who don't know it, I mean, honestly, we could do a whole series of podcasts on the John Lewis Partnership, James, because I've properly geeked out. it was John Lewis, the original John Lewis was a Victorian capitalist, Philip Green of his time. But his sort of epiphany was, if you treat customers honestly, then they'll come back to you. So, but it was a very kind of, how do I extract the most money out of customers? Well, I'll just treat them honestly and then they'll be more of them. His son, John Speed Lewis, was a natural scientist. And in, I don't know, 1909 or something, I can't remember when it was, he fell off a horse and had to spend 2 years lying down to recover, which gave him a lot of time to think. And what he observed was that his father, himself and his brother, took more money out of the business, which was by then just the Oxford Street store, than the 300 people who worked there each year. And he thought, as a natural scientist, that level of imbalance just wouldn't happen in nature. That's not sustainable. And he was also observing the kind of massive inequalities that unfettered capitalism at the beginning of the 20th century was creating. So there were millionaires and there were slums. And he thought that that's not sustainable. But not only that, he was also observing it create this political polarization and extremism. So you had the rise of right-wing fascism, you had the beginnings of, communism, and he could see that that was creating real instability in the world, pre-First World War, pre-Second World War. And as a natural scientist, he was interested as to whether you could harness the internal dynamism, the intrinsic motivation that capitalism offers, and all of the ingenuity and innovation and whatever that it offers, but make sure that the outputs of it were spread in such a way that enhanced the system in which the business operated in. So it was basically a multi-stakeholder theory of business that he was interested in from a natural scientist perspective. He was like, can you create a business that works like a living organism works, that's in harmony with its surroundings, and that is in constant balance with its surroundings, so that as its surroundings change, it sort of amends itself in order to keep surviving. And so his idea was, well, let's align the interests of labour and capital. So if we give this business to the people who work in it, will it operate like a living system and constantly regenerate itself in order that it can survive, because it's in balance with its surroundings? So it was basically the idea of a man, probably in fever, who had a natural science background, who wanted to use the family business as an experiment to see if you could help it act like a natural living organism, because it's benefiting all of its surroundings.
How did he get that past his father?
Well, he had to wait for him to die, James, going to be honest with you.
Okay, cool. We're all interested, like, how do you make that transition happen in organisations? Yeah, kill off the guy who owns it.
He had to, so basically his father gave him Peter Jones as an experiment. So they'd got Peter Jones down the road in Chelsea as another store, and he gave him Peter Jones a bit of as an exasperated father to go on then, run your weird ideas in this in this shop. And he did for a few years, and then eventually his father died, and it took him a few years, but ultimately he gave the business to the people who owned it in order to see if it would think more long term, it would think more about the society in which it was situated, it would think about making sure that all of the stakeholders had value from the relationship. It would think about fairness, it would think about community, it would think about humans, so it and it would make sufficient profit to enable it to continue to do that. And it had a written constitution, which I think again is one of the sort of first written constitutions of an organisation, one of the only ones still that was written. I think the first one was in like 1927 to try and capture why this organisation was an experiment in doing business better.
Yeah.
And that totally lit my fire, as you can probably tell.
Yeah.
And I properly was excited by that. And so I wandered around the business. I blagged my way into strategy roles. I blagged my way into HR and culture and leadership roles, because I was so fascinated about how is this thing going to continue to survive in a very different century.
Mm. And interesting, you just like use the language that ultimately echoes the organization that you now lead.
Yeah.
Where there's just something really wonderful about listening to you tell the story of an organization that's 100 plus years old, and then how that mirrors the work that you're doing now across multiple organizations thinking about the future.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I have a question here, Sarah. I'm just sitting in this experience of business reflecting nature.
Mm-hmm.
Like, actually, would this survive in nature? No, it wouldn't. There is such an imbalance that everything would be wiped out. There would be extinction if that continued in the way that it was going. And so what can we learn from the lessons of nature? And is there a way in which you can be successful in an organization by replicating some of the thinking that just exists all around us in the world? And you'd have to say that a profitable organization for well over 100 years is a pretty good example of that working, right?
Well, indeed. And when I was thinking back the other day to all those headhunters who said, "Oh yeah, you don't want to work at the John Lewis partnership; it's slow and And I was thinking, well, but it's still around, right?
Yeah.
And so the way that it does things seems to have an ability to create resilience and adaptability in changing circumstances that something like, let's say, House of Fraser or Debenhams or some of the other competitors, where they were trying to maximize something, didn't have. And actually, when you look at nature never tries to maximize anything. If it does, it creates an unsustainable system. It's trying to balance, and it's constantly iterating to try and find harmony and balance. And I think that is the genius of Speed and Lewis, the founder, that he recognized that if a business tries to maximize or put one stakeholder above any of the others, it will create disequilibrium and dysfunction. And therefore finding a way to constantly be in balance and harmony is the sort of kernel, my sense of what the sort of heart of the organization is trying to do. It's not trying to maximize anything; it's trying to balance things.
So if we bring this back to kind of your experience of purpose and that kind of internal felt experience of meaning and contribution, it feels like this environment provoked that within you, and you could see and understand what it was like to be in service of something. How did that grow, and where did you become more aware and more conscious of it and its significance, both for you and for the kind of possibilities within organizations?
Well, so John Lewis partnership has two brands, John Lewis and Waitrose, and they are under the same competitive threats as all other retailers. And I had spent a while in the organization seeing the long-term future of the business get ever more threatened. And I didn't know about purpose then. I wouldn't have called it that. I hadn't read any books on organizational purpose. The sort of early 2000s, I just hadn't come across it as a concept. 2010 or so. So first of all, I thought maybe it's a strategy thing. So blagged my way into strategy and thought, clearly the answer is we needed a clever strategy to get us out of this kind of difficulty, commercial difficulty. And certainly strategy plays a big role, but I could also see that we were spending really quite a lot of money on clever strategies, and then nothing was really changing inside the organization. So then I became interested in, well, maybe it's a cultural thing. Strategy is clearly important, but culture eats strategy for breakfast. So let's go work in HR and understand culture and leadership and how. I mean, again, one of the brilliant things about the partnership is it has, 400 sites, and because they look at employee engagement regularly, you could see that on a 100-point scale, the top 10% and the bottom 10% of sites, shops, had a 90-point difference in terms of employee engagement. And over the years, there have been so many investigations as to why, and it always came down to local leadership. Does the local leadership create an environment where people feel heard, respected, trusted, listened to, able to contribute their ideas, feel like an owner, feel like they're cared about, has a supportive team? It was a human thing that was creating these very different kind of engagement scores, but also very different financial results and customer engagement scores. So I was like, right, culture is really important, and of course, culture is super important. And I could see that lots of interventions were happening at kind of the strategy and culture level, but that the organisation was still struggling, and I couldn't see how it was going to recover its mojo, basically. And I began to be interested, because of all the geekery, in, well, what was the founder trying to achieve here? Because everyone believed that the John Lewis Partnership was a purpose-led organisation. But when I began digging into it, there were 80,000 different versions of what the purpose was. All of them, like, good, right? So some would go, this is an engine for social mobility. Others would say it's a massive experiment in industrial democracy. Others would say it is about being totally transparent and honest with the customer and being the most trusted retailer in Britain. Others would say, oh, it's a very useful combination of general merchandise and grocery, which means we could do click and collect better than anyone else. And we're going to be a great, so all of these are valid things. But if you've got 80,000 different versions of what the purpose of the organization is, and you're in a very disrupted industry, how do you make big strategic decisions that require pivots or massive investment or long-term thinking or whatever? Because even at exec and board level, you've all got a different idea of what success looks like. And the key thing was they didn't know they had a different idea of what success looked like. So because I'd sort of hopped around the organization and geeked out, I was sitting there going, look, I can see this problem. You have all got different goals. And because we're not a traditional shareholder-based organization, we haven't got a profit maximization goal. And so instead of that, we've got all of these other things, which are pulling us in all these different directions, which is creating strategic lack of clarity, cultural disintegration, as people come here thinking that they're here for their own personal purpose, hoping to find it in the organization, finding a bit of it, and then, so we've got this kind of very loose conglomerate of lovely people doing great work, but without any central mission of what it is we're trying to actually do. Which is fine if the environment is stable and you can just kind of do what you do and sell some stuff and make some profit. But in a very disrupted, competitive environment, that is a massive handicap. So that's where I began to go, what we actually need to do is articulate why this organization exists. What does success look like? What are we actually trying to do? And how do we do that in a way that is authentic, based on the founder's thinking, relevant to the 21st century, co-created not just by all of the employees in the organization, but their suppliers and the customers and the communities in which we operate and future generations. And so, I basically, literally about a month into COVID, when you can imagine the operational chaos. John Lewis stores are all shut. All of the trades having to go online. Waitrose stores have got security guards on the toilet roll aisles. These were unanticipated operational challenges.
Yeah.
Supply chains are a mess, huge amounts of effort going on helping customers and supply chain, all the rest of it. And I'm there going, hey, this is a great moment to talk about why we're here. Who's in? Who's up for that? And actually, the surprising thing was lots of people were up for it, because they could see, as in so many organizations around the world, people were doing stuff driven by a sense of trying to make things better for people, right? For communities and suppliers and employees and all sorts of things. Nobody was telling them to. Nobody was saying, here's your bonus if you do this. Nobody was saying, here's the impact on our share price if we do that. It was just a very human response to, there is a clear need here. How do we help? How do we use our assets and resources to help? And people felt empowered. They felt like they were doing something meaningful. They were able to make decisions and were trusted to do so. They were innovating at extraordinary speed. They were on fire, engaged. All of their human capabilities were absolutely focused on how do we help. And in the John Lewis Partnership, I was like, well, this is the essence of our organization. How do we make sure that throughout this experience, we're able to harness this, capture it, and understand how that relates to who we are as an organization, and then take that into whatever emerges post-pandemic. And so we began basically a massive project to listen to all of these stakeholders and then rewrite the front page of the Constitution so that it was relevant and resonant for a different century. Which is, it's a bit of a sacred cow, James, not going to lie.
I was going to say that must have, how did that feel?
Wow, goodness me. I mean, massive imposter syndrome. What helped was there was so one of the wonderful things about the partnership is all previous partners who have any kind of connection to the partnership in terms of emotional connection are sort of hanging out in the shadows waiting to see if they can be helpful. And there's this brilliant chap called Ken Temple. So my title at the time was Director of Special Projects, which made me sound like a spy, which I really enjoyed. But this role only happens about once every 20 years in the partnership, and it sort of emerges when something needs doing, and then it goes away again. And the last Director of Special Projects was this guy called Ken Temple, who retired like 25 years ago and was the last person to have redrafted the front page of the Constitution in 1999. And I got in touch with him. He'd been retired for 25 years and said, mentor me through this process. And he did. Yeah. He was brilliant. Yeah. It's like Yoda. I would kind of go and talk to this brilliant, wise man about the history of the partnership and how to make sure that this was done with integrity. And anyway, so I felt hugely honoured, but also that it was the natural result of 12 years of geeking out on the history of this thing and why I loved it and why I wanted it to continue. It was an extraordinary experience.
Yeah. I mean, what I find really interesting listening to you speak, Sarah, and I'm kind of having just a moment of like the kind of the richness of what it must have been like to be part of that experience of rewriting that, and what that must have meant to you and the kind of depth of that. And I'm kind of sat in it going, like I'm hooked, but like totally hooked. But there's also something like really interesting for me, and when I listen to you talk, it's the geeking out bit that you kind of lead with, which is the problem solving, the thinking, the kind of the how do we solve this in a way that enables us to continue. Yet all I feel when you talk about it is there is an intangible magic about the experience that you're having that is fueling you in these moments. Because we can talk about COVID really lightly because it was something that happened a few years ago, but like that was a frightening experience. Like I remember being sat on the sofa with my wife. Our son had not long been born. My daughter was supposed to start school. And gosh. Boris Johnson telling us that we're not allowed out of our house anymore, and thinking, what's the future for my children?
Yeah.
I'd never felt anything like that before. I'd never lived in a world where I felt fear or concern in that way. Like I'm all about kind of optimism and what might be possible and unrealistic aspiration. And then all of a sudden I'm not allowed to leave the house, and I don't know if my daughter can start school, which was, which is a critical thing for any young person and the kind of the world that they inhabit. So for you in that moment to turn around and go, all right, let's really lean into who we are and why we're here. Like that's a deeply courageous thing to do in that moment on one hand. And on the other hand is totally the natural question to pose to an organization like John Lewis, right? There's this harmony, if we use your language, this balance between intellect and soul in the way that you were kind of navigating your way through all of that. Yeah. And I love the fact that you turned around and went, I didn't really understand or know of purpose as a concept because I hadn't read any purpose books.
Well observed, James.
and yet here you are, like in everything that you talk about, it's imbued with what purpose really is, which is an emotional experience of meaning and significance.
Yeah, totally. But I literally hadn't read about it. I mean, I'd read a lot of books, as you could tell, on all sorts of things to do with business. But I hadn't come across this as a concept. I think the nearest, I can't remember which book it was, the nearest I got to was, there was a book that talked about the logic and magic of business. Cool. And I liked that as if you try and run a business with only one of those two things, you will fail. And magic I'd seen talked about in lots of ways that to me looked like great branding or great marketing or great product development or innovation, but I hadn't really connected to it at a soul level of why does this matter to me as a human being rather than as a retailer or as somebody who's trying to flog something. How do I think the world's a better place as a result of this? And with the John Lewis partnership, I genuinely thought the world was a better place because that organization existed. I could see the benefits that it had on people's lives and their families. I mean, it is extraordinary as an organisation. It really is. And I could see the benefit it had on suppliers. And we would ask them, they'd say, what's different working with us? And the suppliers would say, you treat us like humans and you trust us, which means that we're prepared to innovate and invest more, which means that we do better stuff with you. And it's all human.
Yeah.
It's not contractual. It was all human. And the dominant narrative of business was that it's a nexus of contracts, that it's financial maximization, that it's, people showing up and being financially incentivized to do stuff. And I was like, but this is not my experience. When I look around at, I've seen that in my early stage of the career, and I saw what happened, and it was sold for £1. This multi-billion retail empire was sold for £1 in like 2022. And here's the John Lewis partnership thinking very differently about success and what matters and how to treat people and how to think about business and the role of business. And I was really struck, I think particularly as a result of COVID and the climate crisis and the massive social inequality crisis and the mental health crisis and everything else, thought not only is there huge benefits for the individual and businesses if they really understood this purpose thing, but that right now society radically needs businesses to harness their capacity to influence the future in a positive way. Business is so powerful, and it creates so many ripple effects in terms of how we live and how we relate to each other and all sorts of things, and the environment. And it wouldn't be enough. I mean, this was my kind of particularly over the last 2 or 3 years, it would not be enough for business to just do less harm through regulatory compliance and disclosures and all the rest of it. We're still on an extraordinarily unsustainable trajectory environmentally and I think socially. And if business could reimagine its role as creating positive, lasting value for all people and planet for generations to come, because of the huge influence that it has, I felt that there was a very strong calling to try and help accelerate that.
So let's just go full circle. We started this with, I didn't know what I wanted to be apart from in sandals all of my life. Now all of a sudden we have a huge calling, like what a transition, what a journey to that moment. So before we kind of get into where you are now, maybe what's to come, a question I'm really interested in is, and what about life outside of work? So how did all of this show up in, all of these significant moments that right now are kind of dot pointed by the kind of the career journey, like in terms of meeting a partner, becoming a parent, all of that, and the kind of the life that you're creating beyond the world that you kind of live in from a work perspective. What's been the influence of that journey, that full circle journey of sandals to kind of unleashed? How was that expressed in a kind of outside of work context?
So I've got 2 kids, they're 17 and 15. So during COVID, I think we were extraordinarily lucky in that A, my husband and I could work from home, and B, my children at the time were, 11 and 13. So they were not stressed by GCSEs and A-levels. They could go to the toilet by themselves, James. I did not have to get involved. They really enjoyed homeschooling and just got on with it. Although I have to say, my son will not thank me for saying this, but he had one of those pull-up bars on the doorway of the room that he was doing his work in, and he thought the camera was off. And it was only when his Spanish teacher said, Thomas, would you mind coming down from that? Because he was hanging upside down like a bat while pretending to be involved in his Spanish lesson.
Yeah, amazing. Like he's working on his abs and his hip flexors by hanging. That would have been brilliant if he'd have just come straight back and gone, but the blood flow is going to my brain and it's helping me learn.
Do you know, have you met my son? He probably won't tell you exactly that. So we were really fortunate in that I could devote a lot of my bandwidth to, okay, so how do we use this right now to really think hard about what matters? So that was great. And I think having teenagers who are interested in the world and interested in their future, really helps clarify my own thinking around how do I want to feel. If I look at 2050, I'll be 75.
Shh. Say it isn't so. Say it isn't so.
I feel like I'm so young. But the world, who knows? But it's likely that the world will be a lot hotter, and things will be a lot more difficult from a biodiversity perspective and from a scarce resources perspective and a whole load of other challenges. Politically, who knows? Socially, who knows? I would hope that there is less inequality and less war and a whole lot of other things, but really with that kind of environmental stuff going on, I think it's going to be turbulent. And I feel, as I'm sure most humans do, that you want to be able to look back and go, I tried my best to make this better than otherwise it might have been. And to be able to look at my kids and go, I tried my best to make this better than otherwise it might have been. Still might not be great, but I did what I could. And one of my external mentors, I am so lucky to have Margaret Heffernan, who is a brilliant author and thinker and speaker, as a mentor. And the reason that came about is in my very early, I think the John Lewis Partnership is interesting. Like first year, I'd gone to a talk that she did because I thought she was brilliant. And this is not the kind of thing that I would have done then. Still not really the kind of thing I would have done now. But I went up to her at the end and I said, I think you're brilliant. And I work at the John Lewis Partnership and I think it could be a really interesting and important organisation for how we might think about business in the future. I don't know what to do about that. Can I take you for a coffee? And she's, bless her, said yes. And basically transformed my life. She introduced me to people and books and thinking and just a whole world that I had not had any idea existed. And that has been transformational, not just for my sort of work self, but for my whole self.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been very lucky.
Amazing. And there's just something wonderfully human about meeting people who are willing to do that.
Yeah.
Like that for me is part of where the magic happens for us as a species on the planet, is when there are people around us that are just willing to go, hey, I can connect you over here, or hey, I can help you with that, or hey, like let's just chat and see what comes out of it. Because that the kind of the Aristotle misquote around we are greater than the sum of our parts couldn't ever be more true. Like that for me is a really grounding philosophy in just how I try to show up in the world. Is I personally, James Glover, am greater than the sum of my parts. There is something intangible within me that is trying to be in the world, and yet when that joins with somebody else and joins with somebody else and joins with somebody else, like the multiplier effect of all of those things is magical. Yeah. Genuinely magical.
Completely agree. And I'm really at the beginning of my learning journey on this sort of interconnected, very kind of human. I mean, I'm interested in the inner development goals. I'm interested in these ideas of deep connection and love that are going to be so important as we navigate turbulence. We can talk about all the tech and the politics and the finance that needs to move and the investments that need to be made and the net zero plans and all of that stuff is super important. But I think it's only really going to get driven by a deeper sense of what it means to be human and how connected we are and how we need each other. And I think I am beginning to learn what brilliant others are doing in this space that I think is going to be ever more important. And part of what I'm interested in is how you bring that language into the business world.
Yeah.
Because it's so logical and cognitive and rational and financial and all those things which are very important. But if it's not combined with love and creativity and imagination and joy and connection, we're not going to get there. So
no, 100%. There's that kind of a mentor and friend of mine just said, I think the challenge of our time is to be able to connect meaning within individuals into meaning within organizations. And the more we're able to make that interconnection happen, the more is possible.
Totally.
And I'm like, well, I'm going after that, because actually right now, the more an individual has a truer understanding of of what is meaningful to them. And even that language is misunderstood, misconstrued often. Like, oh yeah, I'm clear on my values. Great. Well, we've probably got about 12 words that cover everybody's values, but what really informs that? What are the experiences that have fundamentally shaped who you are, that are beyond the roles that you play? And I get myself in lots of discussions about, being a parent isn't a purpose. It's a role that you play, but it's a way in which you express your purpose. So, you're clear on what is meaningful, and then think about the contribution that you want to make. Well, the things that are meaningful to me, to your point, love, connection, belonging, joy, whatever they may be, how do I express those in the roles that I play in my life, so that actually there is a depth in all of those roles that, yeah, just enables more. That feels like an incredible thing for us to try and make happen, to proliferate.
And who wouldn't want that, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
I think it's the sort of ultimate expression of what we are as humans. And I think for us, just so long, but not forever, maybe the last 50 or 60 years, particularly in the Western economies, we have assumed that is not applicable to business.
Yeah, it's not important. Yeah.
Not important, not applicable to business, maybe a private thing that you might think about, but certainly not to be done in the workplace. And I think that's been all right for a bit, in terms of if an organization is optimizing for efficiency in a relatively stable environment, politically, economically, socially, environmentally, maybe that's good enough. But I think in a very disrupted future that is unknown and likely to be very turbulent, and we're going to have to use all of our human abilities to adapt to a very different environment. You're going to want all of that human capability, and optimizing for efficiency is no longer a sensible choice. You need to optimize for adaptability and trust. Mm-hmm. And really the only things that are going to underpin that is human connection and intrinsic motivation, and a deep connection to what's meaningful. So do it or be irrelevant is my pitch.
Be extinct. Let's go back to the kind of So, and I'm wondering, Sarah, if that kind of just leads us quite nicely into when you start to think about going forwards into the future and the kind of the role that you play in your organization, but where you are in your life, and the things that you're interested in, and where the kind of the cerebral and the logic and the magic kind of coalesce into something for you. What does that really look like? What are you most excited about, given the challenges that you've just expressed? What are you most excited about?
So it's a good question, and to be honest, so at the moment I work at this brilliant charity called Blueprint for Better Business, and we work with leaders of large businesses to try and help them imagine basically a better way of doing business that creates positive impacts on people and planet. And the charity's been going for about 12 years. I've only been there for 2.5. It does really excellent work, and I would recommend the website to all of your listeners. Blueprint for Business.
We'll put it in the show notes. Let's link it up.
Yeah. And it's becoming increasingly clear to me and many others who work in this space that the pace of change of our economic system broadly is not happening fast enough. So we're gradually, incrementally getting to a do less harm mindset. But really, if we're going to create an economy and a society that is trying to aim for the long-term well-being of all people and planet, the role of business is going to have to be radically reimagined, and not just do less harm, but to focus their attention on optimizing their contribution to the long-term well-being of people and planet, and making money as a result, right? I'm not, you've got to have fuel to drive the car, but where is the car going to? Now that's, so if we're still thriving as a species on a healthy planet in 100 years, it's because we'll have worked out how to shift the economy to optimize for the long-term well-being of all people and planet. And how do we get from here to there? Because it feels very entrenched, the system that we're in at the moment, and it's very difficult to see how do you move such a global system that has got capital markets and huge mega global organizations and governments and all these things that are sort of locking it in place, and how do you move to this much more human and life and planetary focused system? And it's challenging, but I feel like we're at the sort of the interregnum period between these two paradigms. This old version is dying because it's unsustainable, so it's going to stop one way or the other, and something new is trying to emerge. And I really want to spend the rest of my life trying to get this new thing to emerge faster and in a more positive way than otherwise it might if it was just left to its own devices, because I think it will take too long.
Yeah.
I'm a bit impatient. So really that's where I get my energy from, is trying to imagine a better future collectively, getting inputs from all sorts of different people and all sorts of different cultures, and learning from all sorts of different people and cultures, and saying, well, if it's grounded on the core concepts of human dignity and the common good, how might we reimagine society, economy, organizations, business, so that becomes a more likely outcome?
Yeah.
And one could get disheartened at the current pace and a lot of the pushback and the politicization and the challenges. But I get my energy from imagining this better future and then trying to work backwards from that.
Yeah, amazing. I love how the kind of the experiences that have shaped your journey, especially in John Lewis, have just challenged you to scale up, because there's something about what you had to step into in that space that has now enabled you to go, there's an even bigger space for me to be able to step into. Like the kind of the foundations and the principles and the philosophies of harmony and balance are true and are real, and yet actually they need to be applied in a far greater way than they are now. Like, how do we do that? It's almost like, to some degree, it's a similar problem, but the scale of the problem and therefore the impact of the problem has been increased as your appetite for it and your engagement for it, and maybe you can do it in flip-flops too.
Oh, goal. That's a great idea. Maybe not in -6 though.
Yeah, maybe not today, apart from inside. But yeah, that's absolutely amazing, and I think so. Just a wonderful place for us to pause, and I'm so deeply grateful to you for coming on the podcast. It's been so wonderful to talk about your journey and your experiences and your kind of transformation in thinking and feeling into the logic and magic of purpose and what might be possible with that in the world. And I, for one, am a colossal fan of Blueprint for Better Business, and obviously a big advocate of Purpose in Practice community that I get to kind of be a contributing part for, of trying to be a force for good around this work. So thank you for everything that you are doing and bringing and continue to do and bring. It's just, incredibly exciting.
Thank you very much, James. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Excitable Soul podcast. We appreciate your support and would love you to subscribe, rate, review, and recommend if you can. It makes a massive difference. Equally, if you're interested in uncovering, understanding, and unleashing your unique sense of purpose, or that of your teams, come and explore our purpose immersion programs at theexcitablesoul.com. We look forward to hearing from you there or being with you on our next episode. Have an incredible day.